McHugh Smith is the President and CEO of the Humane Society of the Pikes Peak region, an open admission organization with 2 facilities serving 24,000 animals annually throughout southern Colorado. HSPPR contracts with 10 cities and counties to provide animal care and control services. Jan's animal welfare experience over the past 30 years also includes being president of the San Francisco SPCA, San Francisco, California, CEO of the Humane Society of Boulder Valley, Boulder, and director of Eagle County Animal Control, Eagle. Previously, Jan served on the American Humane Association Advisory Board, HSUS Companion Animal Advisory Committee, participated in developing the Asilomar Accords. What is that?
Live release rate.
Okay, thank you, live release rate. And is vice chair of Shelter Animals Count, working to create a national database for shelter statistics. She's the past chair of the Society of Animal Welfare Administrators and served as chair of Catalyst Council, which works to raise the level of care and welfare for cats. Jan speaks on animal welfare issues at conferences all over the United States. Will you please welcome Jan?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm here to talk about my favorite subject, which is about adoptions. And I started out, when I graduated from college, I had a degree in biology, and of course there was a recession going on in the US, and I couldn't find a job, so I saw this ad for the Humane Society, and I went to apply for the job cleaning kennels, and that's how I started out. And I very quickly moved through the organization and got to try out many different types of jobs, and got to be an adoption counselor for a while, and eventually came to run the organization. But in that time, you know, it's been 31 years. I've seen such a giant change in animal welfare, and it's so exciting to be here today with you and hear all the wonderful things that you're doing to help promote the welfare of animals. And I was just thinking, gosh, so much time has gone by. But in 1999, I went to a summit where, like here, we were talking about, you know, what are we doing and why are we doing it the way we have been, just as John referred to. And we started to talk about our adoption process. And at that time, we were working in an older facility, and I'm sure you know what it looks like, dark inside and chain link cages. And we didn't have a very good reputation with the public of our community. We were probably euthanizing about 50% of the animals. And we started to talk about all the criteria that we were using to screen people for adoptions. And so we decided we wanted to take a look at why are we doing that, and is it really making a change? Okay, which button do I press? The green one? Oh yeah, the big arrow. Anyways, these are my kids. I have a human one too, but his picture doesn't get up there. So increasing adoption. So what we decided to do is we wanted to do a study, and it was with the Massachusetts SPCA, the New York Center for Animal Care and Control, and the Humane Society of Boulder Valley. And we decided we'd do a pilot program and see what would happen if we just eliminated the criteria and the questionnaires that we used at the time of adoption. Would that change anything? Would it change the number of returns we get? How would it affect our population? So we decided to take a look at this and make it very customer focused. And our community, we had an approach, and maybe you're familiar with this, of basically turning our adopters into liars. And so people would go out and they would talk to their friends about adopting a cat from the Humane Society, and they go, well, don't check the declaw box, because if you do that, they're going to turn you down. And so, they would come in and they would just, check, oh no, I would never think about declawing an animal. And so then, we would adopt a cat, and they'd promptly take them down to the veterinarian down the street and declaw the cat, right? We had absolutely no control over that, but it was something that we perceived we had control over. And so we said, what would happen if we just stopped asking those questions and took a different approach, a more customer-friendly approach? And so we used to have a 4-page application, and we decided we would get rid of that, and we would start to work on really focusing on trying to save more lives and helping have a better experience when people came in to do service with us. So one of the things we really discussed quite a bit was the idea of perceptions. And if you've been working in animal sheltering for a long time, if we all had a nickel from every time everybody said, oh, I could never do that. Has anybody ever heard that before? Oh, I could never work at a shelter. I'd want to take them all home. Wouldn't we be rich? Absolutely, we would be brilliantly rich. And the impression that people have about animal shelter, oh, it's so sad, I can't go in there. I'm like, oh, suck it up, come on, right? And so how is this experience, what is this experience that they're having when they're coming into the shelter that makes them feel this way, that makes them reluctant to come in and do an adoption? So we have to really take a look at, the shelter. Oh, it's a sad place to visit. So what can we do to make it less sad? In terms visually, and that we have a great customer experience when we walk in the door. It's not cluttered, it's not dirty, it's not smelly. And that there's the perception from our adopters that all these animals have issues. And I was talking about this yesterday, and I'm really conflicted by this because, of course, when we do our direct mail piece, what do we talk about? The dog that came in with a broken leg and list to the right, and how we saved that dog and how we made that dog better. But, so we're kind of perpetuating this whole idea around the fact that our dogs are damaged goods or our cats are damaged. And so people tend to think, oh, I don't want to go adopt there. What am I going to get? So then the other is that folks said, I would never go to adopt at your organization because your staff is, was rude, or they're not very helpful. Or I went in there and you turned me down. And, I'd go out in the grocery store and somebody'd be like, where do you work? And I'd be like, oh, I work at the Humane Society. Really worried because, we did animal control, we had reclaims. So, it was there were tough times and tough conversation to have with people. But the fact that my staff, we couldn't be helpful to the community didn't help us any and didn't help us raise the money and support we needed to be able to get animals into homes and then also to build our organization. So how do we help our customers have a great experience? And first of all, helping to set up those expectations. So we talked a little bit yesterday about branding and really having a positive story about the great animals that we adopt out and having our adopters tell those stories. We call them the happy tales. We really encourage our adopters to tell the ending of the story because when we surveyed people who had adopted from us or who donated to us, they said, you always tell us the bad part up front, but we never hear the end result. And so we said, oh, yeah. So we've been really focusing on, we tell the end of the story. And that helps to, I think, set these animals that we're putting into home into a really positive light. And they can see, oh, well, there's a normal family with an animal that's adopted at a shelter. They're not all damaged goods. I should think about adopting. And so when you're talking about your promotional material, your website, how the message is on your phone, listen to the words you're using. Look at how you're portraying the animals and your organization and the materials, because that's going to set the tone for what's to come when they step in to do an adoption. So what's the experience that your clients are having when they're walking into the door? Oh, there's my baby picture for Flint. Isn't he adorable? Oh my God, he's so cute. But he's a nut job. I need one of those, I need one of those calming collars. I'm like, ooh, I have to go get a couple of those. Anyway, so how do we build community support? And in Boulder, that was the thing we were lacking. We had all this negativity coming in, and you just get downtrodden, and everybody's like, oh, everybody hates us. No, it doesn't have to be that way. We really wanted to say, okay, we're going to provide great customer service, and we're going to have people come in, have a great experience. Even though our shelter wasn't very pretty, we repainted, we got all those stupid signs down that were taped to the door, and all the don't do this, and don't do that, and don't put your hand here, and don't touch the animals. We're like, okay, we're going to shift the paradigm and make it all okay for these things to happen. So one of the most important things when you're talking about trying to shift the paradigm in the culture of your organization around adoption or anything is really to empower our staff to be able to make choices. Because what we found is we had a lot of do's and don'ts. You can do this, you can't do that. People can do this, but they can't do that. And if what we need to do is be able to set up our staff to have the information that they need, the knowledge they need, to be empowered to be able to make decisions based on the situation that they have with that client, so that they have the power to solve problems. Because that's why people are coming to us. We're the experts. They're coming to us to help them solve their problems. And so we need to empower our staff to do that. And so any policy we set for the 90%. And I talk about this a lot, but we tend in animal welfare to make all the rules around the 10% of people that do bad things. And like John was saying earlier, and Betsy, the bottom line is the amount of animals we see in shelters is so tiny compared to all the animals that really do have good homes. But because we see all the negative stuff happening to animals and coming in, we tend to focus right in on that. And we're like, okay, well, nobody can adopt an animal. Like, you can't have a small dog if you have a big dog at home because the big dog might hurt the small dog. And is that really right? I mean, I'm sure there are lots of people in this room. How many have big dogs and small dogs together? Yeah, so it can work, right? So we just really need to make sure we're not reacting when we're setting a policy about how we're going to treat the public or have an adoption. We review our procedures really frequently because sometimes also we find that staff tend to hold on to things. Like when we were changing our policies around adoptions and people, we stopped having the yes and no box for declining, but we found that some staff members just continue to refuse people to adopt it anyway, even though we weren't supposed to be doing that anymore. So you have to make sure that people are on board and aligned, and that the procedures that you have in place really do help the staff to be successful. And then you have to test it and make sure that it's still working. So we would listen in on conversations and listen to the language, listen into phone calls, listen into the adoption process to make sure that we were all aligned. So Petsmart Charities did a great study. You can go onto petsmartcharities.org. They have a whole survey. They've done it for a number of years in a row. But basically, the reason people don't come to shelters is because they perceive that we don't have the breed of animal that they want. They want a purebred. Well, our shelter has about 25% purebred dogs and, well, not so many cats, but mostly dogs, and we could probably help them with that. That animals are sheltered, animals are damaged goods, and that the policies for adoption are too restrictive, and so they're afraid to come in and adopt because they don't want to be judged. So looking at these, there's the things we can fix through information and education. I just wanted to show you some 1953 adoption criteria. I thought it was pretty interesting. So pets, they don't place pets without a donation or spay fee. They don't place dogs to be used as watchdogs. Animals, you can't have an animal unless there's always one person at home. I thought that one was really interesting. Of course, this is the 50s, right? Who was at home? The woman. Permit anyone to adopt a pet for somebody else. This is the gift policy, And you can't have any puppies or kittens if you have small children. Has anybody here had a small child and a puppy or a kitten? Yeah. Did your animal survive? Glad to hear that. So, what this said to me, though, is when I looked at my own policies in 1999, not a whole lot had changed. We were still having really crazy requirements, and a lot of it was based on, this kind of culture of animal welfare in those days. So it's a balancing act, because I know I've talked to some folks who are like, we're handling very behaviorally challenged dogs or very specific breeds of dogs. You have to really talk to your staff about, what are the animal welfare issues in your own community that you want to make sure are addressed? Like, what are the outcomes of the adoption that you're trying to achieve? And we talked about the successful adoption of cats. Is it that animal has social time, the animal has a collar and ID tag, those types of things. What's really important to you in your community? And then look at the core value of your organization. What are the end results you're trying to get, and how you're trying to get your community to shift the culture around animals? At our shelter, we always talk about trying to raise the level of care for animals in our community. And that's what we're really focusing on. And so because we're focusing on that, we always have to make sure we have the best care we can provide in our animal shelter, because we need to walk the talk, right? We need to be the example. And then my favorite one, what do we really control? Now, I am a control freak. I'm going to just admit it. I will not let my husband drive. I have to be in the driver's seat, I swear to God. And on our wedding day, I drove a separate car. Because I don't know why. He drives really fast. It makes me nervous. Now, adoption criteria that we had were really interesting. A lot of my adoption counselors, and myself included, we would see somebody and we'd have this gut reaction about that person. Oh my God. Well, this is Jackson Galaxy, and he's actually now very famous in the US. He's on TV. He does Cats from Hell 101 or something, a show about, cats that have bad behavior in the home, and he helps them to get through it. But Jackson had long dreadlocks. had tats. Now, this is in the 90s, so it's not as common as it is today. And yet, we were thinking, he kept coming in and wanting a job. And I'm like, I can't hire this guy. How are the people in my community going to react to seeing this guy who has these dreadlocks down to his waist and earrings this big and tats? And, he applied 5 times. And then finally, on the 5th time, we decided, well, we'll give him a try. But we made him put his hat up in one of those giant rainbow beanies. And he came to work like this. I swear to God, I'm not lying. But anyways, you can see, eventually, he shaved off his head. But what happened was that I had my own filters, right? I had a gut reaction about how people would react to him, what they would think about the organization if he was our front line, the first person people see when they walk in my building. And I was completely wrong. I mean, this guy ended up being a cat whisperer and raised the level of care for cats in our shelter by, 1,000-fold, and really made us much more conscious about cats. And so, we have to think about the filters and train our staff to kind of look beyond their own filters that they have about people, whether it be, because we have so much diversity in our communities, these preconceived stereotypes that we have to look beyond those. And if we can't, then we need somebody else to step in and take over. Gifts, a great study done in the US and California about gifts. So in America, we never would adopt out animals as gifts because what would happen? What would happen? They'd get returned, right? Because you can't buy an animal for somebody else. Well, it turns out in the study that animals that were gifts actually had a longer retention rate in the home. So it totally blew us out of the water. And here we'd been turning down people for years and years and years who wanted to adopt a dog for Auntie Em. And it turned out that actually these animals have a better chance of staying in the home. Fenced yard, Boulder, Colorado is like a place for athletes. They just love to run. I mean, they're just crazy athletic people. But, we required a 6-foot fence because we didn't want dogs running at large. We did animal control, of course. But it turned out that, by doing that, we were basically saying to people who were incredibly athletic and were willing to take the dogs and train their dogs out on a leash, that they couldn't have a pet. It was, what kind of insanity is that? And they're probably more bonded to their animal because the animal's living indoors and the animal's not being tossed out in the backyard to live out the day. Declawing, we talked about, but we said, you know what, we're against declawing, but I'd rather have a conversation with a client about, they're like, well, I want to declaw my cat. Well, tell me more about that. Why do you want to declaw your cat? Well, I'm worried about my furniture. Well, have you heard about some other methods of controlling that? Have you heard about scratching poses? Have you heard about soft paws? Do you know how to clip a cat's claws? So we could have a conversation and try to let them know about what happens when a cat gets declawed. And most of the time when we treated people like adults, and instead of telling them what they had to do, they could make that choice themselves through education and conversation. And then landlords. Of course, it's a college town. A lot of people were renting there, and so we would check their landlords. We'd make them drag their leases in, call their landlord, is it okay for Joe to adopt a dog? And what happened was, again, people talked about this, and so they would give us their friends' phone numbers, and then they would go, oh, my landlord's name is Fred. And so Fred, Joe's here, and he's interested in adopting a dog. Is it okay if he has a dog? Oh, yeah, sure, yeah, we allow dogs, no problem. And we're turning the adopters, we're making them lie to us when they're trying to do the right thing, and they're trying to save a life. And so, we adopted this motto, in adopters we trust, because if somebody takes the time to get an animal, to come into an animal shelter, with all those negativity thoughts that they're having in their head about, oh, it's sad, it's this and that, they're trying to do the right thing and save a life. And so we want to treat them with respect and come to them where they're at in that moment. And that doesn't mean we're not going to try to, help to educate them or plant some seeds, but to try to step away from all these rules and regulations. And then the other one, my favorite one, is other pets. And so you couldn't adopt from us unless all your other pets could be proved to be sterilized. And so, I'm sure we had good reason for that at the time, but, in the end, the pets we were adopting out were sterilized, and so we weren't adding to the population. And while we could encourage them to get their other animals spayed and neutered, why were we requiring every animal in their household to be spayed and neutered for them to save another life? So like I said, our motto was, in adopters we trust. Folks cared enough to come to the shelter They come with their own experience, and we try to meet them there. And nobody is perfect. And so we are willing to give an animal a good home rather than a great home. And what happened was that enabled us to be able to place many, many more animals into home and to reduce our euthanasia. And it also did some really other wonderful things. It helped to create a lot more community support, because now I wasn't afraid to go in the grocery store and to bump into somebody I met because they had the best experience. And they remembered, oh, you adopted the cat to me, and she's doing great. And all of a sudden, we started to see the shift in our community about our organization because people were having a really much better experience with us. And so we called the process open adoptions. Because it was conversational. So instead of having a list of things that they had to write down and go through, we just decided to chat with them. So it was more interview style, and we were always focused on approval. So in the past, everybody could disapprove. Well, if you disapproved an adoption, you actually had to get approval from your supervisor to disapprove. So we were really trying to change the paradigm on that. And that there weren't any right or wrong answers, but we were trying to dig down a little bit more into the situation. I had met with a guy who had become a new CEO of a humane society. He went and met his neighbor, and he told her where he worked. And she's like, oh, I'll never go in that place again. They're horrible there. And she was like, why? And he said, well, they turned me down on adopting a cat. And he said, and he looked over and he saw this beautiful cat lying on a pillow in the window, and he's like, well, where'd you get that cat? And he's like, well, I bought the cat at a pet store because the Humane Society wouldn't adopt me. And it turned out she had checked the mouser box. And so the staff immediately assumed that this woman was just going to let the cat outside to mouse the countryside, when really, she was looking for a cat that was going to live indoors and do some occasional mousing inside. But, the bottom line was she didn't really care about mousing, and if somebody had a conversation with her about that, that cat would have, cat at a shelter would have found a home. And so it requires listening, and that's a skill you have to train your staff, because I think we tend to lecture, and if we can ask our staff to take a step back and to listen and really try to feel for the intention of the adoption or the intention of a placement, it can really be a big help. So our traditional adoptions were more written screening. We had checklists, we had right or wrong answers, and we had a focus on disapproval. And so the open adoption process, 3 shelters, we tried it for 3 months, and then we were measuring our results about return animals and seeing how those animals did, and then we did follow-up phone calls. And what we found is actually it didn't matter if we did open adoptions or if we did traditional adoptions, the results that we got were the same, our return rates were the same, and we had as many animals being retained in the home. And so that was a clue to us that it was probably more a positive experience to do the open adoptions. And so you can do this too. Shifting the culture in your agency is an easy, well, it's not an easy thing. Let me take that back. It can happen. And the first thing we did is we said, okay, let's try it here. How many people in this room had a pet when they weren't allowed to have one in a rental? This is what we did with our staff. Okay. How many people had to leave a pet at home alone during the day? Okay. So you get the idea? So basically we went through all of the criteria, all these rules and regulations that we had put in place, and then we said, wow, so why are you folks so special? Right? Like, why are we treating our public differently than you are being treated here? And even though they're animal welfare professionals, most of those folks were pretty new to the industry. They'd maybe been in animal welfare for a year. And so it made us really think about it. And so we started to shift the paradigm around that. So we also had to train our staff on asking open-ended questions. And open-ended questions start with what, how, tell me more about that. So instead of saying, let's see, yes and no questions like, have you ever had a pet before? No. Tell me about the animals you've had in the past. That's an open-ended question. And then that starts the conversation. It helps people to get going and telling their story a little bit. And then you can say, well, when was the last time you had a pet? Tell me about your experience with that animal. So we went through and taught people about open-ended questions so that we could we can still get the information, but in a way that feels less interrogative, less intrusive. And we actually tested it on some of our clients and asked them how they felt when we asked them these questions and got feedback on them. We kept kind of shifting the questions instead of saying, again, I noticed that you're looking for a declawed cat. Tell me, what are your concerns about taking a cat home that has claws? And then the other thing is adults learn when they're very interested in specific information. So the other thing we used to do is, we had a little sheet that they put down their name and address, and we said, what are you interested in learning about today? Crate training, housebreaking, and they could circle the subjects that they wanted information on. And so then our staff member would be able to focus in on that information for the client. So then they actually paid attention. Because have you ever had the adoption where, you're standing there and you're going through your contract, and here's all the paperwork, blah, 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 here's the insurance, and, you're looking at your client, and they're like, wah, 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 right in their head? Wah, wah, that's you. They're not hearing words. They're just like, I adopted a puppy, I adopted a puppy, I adopted a puppy. Wah, 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 wah. And so then, they'd come back, and they'd be like, they get home, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, crap, how much did she tell me to feed him? They can't remember a thing, right? So we put together these giant packets of information, and we send them home, and they're going home with their bag of food and this giant packet of information, and the want, want, want in their head. And, if you have a good relationship with them, hopefully they're going to call you back. And that's what happens is when you start to have this incredible rapport, not only, they're going to call you back if they have an issue or if they have a concern, and they're not going to be, bringing that animal to another organization, because you're going to say to them, listen, if this doesn't work out, it's okay. You're welcome to bring this animal back, and we'll try to find a better fit. So we had some wild ideas that we tried. We tried test drives. Anybody ever done this where somebody comes in, they're like, well, I'm not really sure. I'm like, why don't you take the dog home and see how it goes? Anybody ever do that? Yeah. And so, the dog goes home for the weekend, and they're like, oh, it worked out great, or, it didn't work out great. And then you can bring the dog back, and we have more information about that dog. About 70% of our animals are stray, so we don't have a lot of information. We don't know if he's going to chase the cat at home. So it really helps us to get more information that we can do a better job the next time of adopting that animal out. Tails on trails, we had a lot of hiking in Boulder, and so we would have animals go out with our volunteers, and they'd be hiking on the trails, and being able to speak to people about the great animals we had for adoption, and then people would be like, wow, that dog came from the Humane Society? Holy smokes, I had no idea. So it was great promotion. Adoption profile, the questionnaire just really got narrowed down to just a couple of things, which is their name, their address, their phone number, and then what were they interested in learning about. And volunteer adoption counselors in the Humane Society of Pikes Peak region where I work now, we use them enormously because we have so much volume of people coming in and so few staff members. Our volunteers are actually doing the majority of the adoption process, and this has worked really well for us in terms of helping to speed up and streamline that process so people don't have to wait so long. What we found before we were able to do that is that a lot of people left because they were frustrated with the long period of time that they had to wait. So we had this crappy old shelter, and now, because of community support, we were able to build a new facility. We increased adoptions over 20% in the first year that we started our open adoption process. It decreased our length of stay, and I know we're talking about capacity for care, which is so key when you have high volume of animals coming through your shelter. And because it decreased the time in the shelter, animals stayed healthier, we had more resources, all the things that John was talking about with the cats. Our return rates stayed the same, roughly about 5%. Because we were able to move animals to our building more quickly, we were able to take animals from other communities where they were overburdened with animals. And so we did transfers. We had animals coming up from New Mexico and other states where they were at risk for euthanasia, but we had now had space for them, and they could go up for adoption. And because we had more diversity in our adoption area, we increased our adoptions even more because people, when it comes to dogs, people want choice. And it increased our donations because people started to bond with us and they had a good experience. And we started a whole idea around, okay, it's from cradle to grave, so to speak. You know, we want to take care of this person and their pet and that relationship through the entire life of that animal. And that really resonated with our community and really helped us to increase our donations. So how to attract adopters? You know, we did all the things we've talked about here, but, you know, increasing our hour of operations. Word of mouth was probably the #1 way we were able to increase our adoptions because people had a good experience. We use variable pricing. We talked a little bit about that with free cats, but variable pricing for our dogs. A puppy might be adopted out for a $600 adoption fee, but a black lab that's 10-year-old might be $65. So the puppy's leaving a legacy of care for animals that are going to be more difficult to adopt or need more care or medical attention. I thought this one was a really cool idea. You know, free vaccines for life for every animal that was adopted in August. What a great promotion. So there are lots of different resources out there about open adoptions. You can go online. There are lots of different articles about groups that have gone through this transition and the cultural change of getting their staff to be less restrictive and more open to having conversations with the adopters who are coming into your facility. And I really encourage you to take a look at that. There's also many, many studies around some of the gut reactions and myths that we have in animal welfare that show that we're not always right. So I really encourage you to take a look at some of that data and share it with your staff, because for us, the data was really powerful and enabled us to be able to feel more comfortable about these adoptions, and to be able to have also to have a safety net for the animals was really important, so that the follow-up with adopters and making sure that they had the resources they need was another really key part to getting our staff to transition from a very regimented interrogation type of adoption, which, you know, didn't really work. And it made everybody feel bad. And the end result was our team felt so much better about the way they were able to take care of our clients. They were much happier in their jobs because it wasn't always about being in conflict with people who are coming into our facility. So I really encourage you to take a look, and I hope you'll be able to increase adoptions in your own community.